Hello, my name is Tom Young, author of the new World War II novel Silver Wings, Iron Cross. First of all, my thanks to Kimberly Howe and all the folks at ThrillerFest for making it possible to do these video presentations. Of course, we would have preferred to have met face-to-face in New York for ThrillerFest as originally planned, but we've been overcome by events, and this is the next best thing. So my thanks to Kimberly and everyone else for setting this up. With this video, I'd like to talk a little bit about the things a writer might do to research a historical novel. I've been working in the World War II time frame, so a lot of what I discuss will have to do with that, but I think some of this can apply to researching a historical novel set at any time. At the very least, much of it will apply to setting a historical novel at any point in the 20th century. Naturally, the first place to begin is good old-fashioned homework, academic research, reading up on your time period. I once saw an interview with Herman Wouk, and he said he read something like 300 books on World War II before he sat down to write The Winds of War and War in Remembrance. And it's not like he didn't know anything to begin with. He was a World War II veteran. But still, he felt he needed to do that much research. Now, he was writing sweeping epics, so he did need a very broad knowledge base. I don't think we all need to read 300 books, but his story certainly makes the case for how one needs to start with a good, solid historical understanding of your time period. One tool we have available to us in our day that Herman Wouk did not have in his day, of course, is the internet. Google is the writer's best friend, and also YouTube. When I was in the process of researching my latest novel, I found some really helpful World War II training films on YouTube. Someone, probably several someones, has done us writers a great favor by uploading all these period training films to YouTube. And I was astounded at the quality of these films. They were very professionally produced, very professionally written and acted. They were as good as any training film I saw in my time in the military, except what I saw was in color, and these were black and white. The military really brought some high-level Hollywood talent to bear on these films. Because a lot of what I write is aviation-oriented, I was looking for films such as how to fly the B-17 Flying Fortress, how to fly the C-47 Skytrain. And some of those films included the actor Arthur Kennedy playing the role of the instructor pilot, and he really makes you believe he's an experienced pilot in one of those aircraft. Just a wonderfully produced set of films. And they offer really granular level detail about how crews operated aircraft back then. And by taking that kind of technical information and applying it in light brushstrokes, you can really add authenticity to what you're writing. But there's a lot more available besides aviation-oriented films. You can find a training film on anything: how to load and fire the M1 rifle, how paratroopers packed parachutes back then, how troops used the radios they had back then. In one of my novels, I researched a scene where a farmer was working on a farm during World War II. I found a video, not a training video, but I found a video on how to harness a team of mules to a wagon, and I found that pretty useful. So again, you can find anything on YouTube. One practical tip someone once gave me for writing a historical novel was to go to eBay or wherever and see if you can find a Sears catalog from the time period you're writing. And of course, that would be 20th century. But that will give you a great idea of what middle-class people were wearing at that time, the items they had in their kitchens and in their households, and of course what they cost. Just a very practical little tip on setting scenes back then. Old magazines can help too. Things like the old Life magazines, the old Look magazines can be quite useful. Something that I found helpful was to listen to old radio broadcasts, and I suppose the same would apply for old television broadcasts if you're writing something in the era of television. But in the process of writing World War II novels, I found it helpful to go back and listen to recordings of some of the great correspondents of the day, broadcast by people like Edward R. Murrow, Robert Trout, Richard C. Hautelet, William L. Shirer. I just found that very helpful in setting a tone and understanding what people were hearing on the radio when these things were happening in real time. Of course, naturally, it helps to visit battlefield sites if you can, when we get to the point where we can travel again. Some of the World War II battle sites, of course, are quite remote. Others are not. If you can travel to Europe, if you can get there, there is no substitute for a writer's boots on the ground to see how terrain impacted events, to see how the light looks in a given place. Even if the place has changed a lot, that can be informative as well. I once visited the World War I site at Verdun, and now it's all green and pretty. It doesn't look like the hellscape of 1916. That just gives you an idea of the level of destructive power that was brought to bear at Verdun. So again, there's no substitute for being there. But if you can't go, so many World War II battles were very well documented. So again, we go back to the internet, we can find photos and films and so forth. If you're writing in other time periods, that changes the options. Of course, if you're writing a Civil War novel, plenty of Civil War battlefields are beautifully maintained, places like Manassas, Antietam, Gettysburg, and so forth. If you are a scuba diver, by the way, there are World War II battle sites that are closer than you might realize. But during the Battle of the Atlantic of World War II, German U-boats tried to choke off shipping between North America and Great Britain. They tried to choke off supplies, and they sunk thousands of freighters and tankers. And a lot of that action took place very close to the eastern seaboard of the U.S., sometimes within sight of land. When I was a college student at UNC Chapel Hill, I was in the scuba club, and we dived on a lot of these World War II wrecks just off the Outer Banks of North Carolina. And one of the more fascinating wrecks we dived on was the wreck of a German U-boat. The U-352 was sunk by a Coast Guard cutter. And of course, after you've seen those wrecks up close, you want to research them, and that makes for fascinating reading. So again, if you're so inclined, those are World War II sites that are actually quite close by. Naturally, it helps to talk to veterans if you can. If not, we have their memoirs and recordings of interviews that were done with them over the years. Just to give one example, last year, HBO did a wonderful documentary about the 8th Air Force over Europe during World War II. It was called The Cold Blue. And they found a bunch of old veterans in their 90s. Those guys were wonderful. It's just a terrific documentary. Another thing you can do is take a class. And I mean that very broadly. You can get pretty creative in terms of how you can acquire some new knowledge and apply that to what you're writing. For example, say you're writing a novel set in World War II, or for that matter, World War I or Vietnam or Korea, and you've got a battle scene and someone gets wounded. Maybe one of your characters is going to call out medic. To know what's going to be in that medic's head, it will help you to take a Red Cross first aid class. Of course, some of the things you learn in the class will have changed since the time period you're writing about, but it won't be hard to figure out what's changed. And that helps you know what's going to be on a medic's head as he approaches a wounded soldier. All right, I've got to stop the bleeding. I've got to get the airway open, that kind of thing. Plus, there are all kinds of good reasons to take a Red Cross first aid class that have nothing to do with writing. It's well worth your time. To research a novel once, I took a marksmanship class. It was a long-range rifle class, and that was absolutely fascinating. To research another novel, I took a martial arts class. I had a character who was a martial arts expert, and I wanted to learn something about that. Believe me, I am never going to be a martial arts expert, but it was fun to take that class. It got me in better shape, for one thing, and it helped me learn the lingo, how those folks talk, the things they think about, some of the moves they do. You should have seen the instructor the first day of class. When I came into class and he asked me why I was taking the class, and I said, mainly just to hear you talk. And then I explained why, that I was researching for a novel. And so I really got a kick out of that class, literally. Living history organizations can be quite helpful. There are groups that reenact all kinds of things. There are reenactment groups from groups that reenact encampments from the Revolutionary War, Civil War, and so forth. I once had a buddy who was with a group that reenacted civilian conservation corps camps from the Depression era. He very proudly showed me his shovel marked CCC. You can find these history buffs who will be delighted to talk to you about these things. If you're writing a World War II novel, perhaps you're familiar with an organization called the Commemorative Air Force. Their national headquarters is in Texas, but they have squadrons all over the country, and they usually have an air show schedule in the summer. I don't know how the pandemic will affect that this year, but in most years they do tours over the summer, and they love to talk to people about their airplanes. In Frederick, Oklahoma, there is a wonderful organization called the World War II Airborne Demonstration Team. They fly World War II era aircraft, and they reenact personnel drops like the airborne drops over Normandy in period uniforms. And not only that, they take volunteers. They have a parachute school. If you are so inclined, they will teach you to jump out of a perfectly good airplane in a World War II uniform, and they'll let you do it with them. Just a great bunch of people. As you can see, the possibilities for researching a World War II novel or researching any kind of historical novel are endless, fascinating, and fun. I'm Tom Young, author of the World War II novel Silver Wings, Iron Cross. Best of luck with all your writing projects, and please stay safe and well.